we're talking about in food security and climate change. And the thing that impresses me individually and collectively about this group is it wasn't just the science they had to figure out, it was all the other things around it. So infrastructure, stakeholders. So they've had to get over the mountain, around the mountain, and through the mountain. And that's a lot of what we're going to hear from them.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Jamie Tyrell. I'm with Renaissance Ag and a company called Cultivated. And what I'm going to talk to you today about is what's called fodder, or what we're talking about is an alternative animal feed that is actually using water, electricity, and seeds to produce fresh fodder. So we'll talk a bit about that. Let me tell you a little bit about the company, though. I'm Canadian. My business partners are American. I also have another business partner who is Canadian as well. So we can call this the Quadlateral Summit, VJ, next time. So the company is based out of Utah, and they are called Renaissance Ag. And their mission is to become basically a foundational partner to small and medium-sized livestock producers. And that is probably the majority of the farmers across Canada, across the USA, and probably across the world in terms of size. And we want to help these livestock producers produce quality and volume by improving feed value and reducing overhead. And we're going to get a little bit more into detail about that. In terms of animals, you can see here we have some cows, goats, we have some pigs, we have some chickens, and as we described, we can talk about the camels later. Our mission is to essentially focus on the local food security by strengthening local small and medium-sized livestock producers. And we're looking at connecting those local farmers into the supply chain in a more meaningful and sustainable manner through the technology. We're also looking at, and we heard from somebody earlier, about converting animal waste and converting manure waste into alternative proteins for the system and incorporating that into regenerative ag principles and practices throughout the world. And we can talk about that throughout the idea. So we all have a problem that we want to solve. That's why we're in business. This is the kind of pièce de résistance as to why we are here. We've talked about water today a lot. Agriculture, as we know, specific to whether it's for animals or whether it's for crop production, for personal right direct to consumption, uses a lot of water. Uses about 92% of the water. VJ, you had a different slide. It was about 70%. In other words, it's a lot. It's a lot of water that we're producing for the type of food that we need. In terms of land use, 37% of land area. I'm going to proposition something to you today that actually reduces the amount of land to produce the same amount of product. And that's going to be kind of an interesting, compelling argument. In terms of energy, we use about 30% of global energy to produce this. And that's a lot. We heard about coal earlier. We heard about rising prices in fuel. We heard about rising prices in just about everything over the last 2 years to 6 months. And then we're also talking about greenhouse gases and how we can look at those. As we know, currently we are looking to increase our population. By 2050, we'll have approximately 10 billion people. And in terms of producing crops, we need to increase that production probably about fourfold. So we have a current population base now, and we're already exceeding that demand. So we're trying to find ways through what we call vertical farming or controlled environment ag as to how do we do that. So our product is looking at taking that to a step further, but for animal feed. So how do we control the environment? How do we control the vertical farming in a product through animal feed? And this is what our solution is. And it's basically a simple piece of technology. When I say simple, the inputs are seed, the input is water, and the input is electricity. Those are the only 3 things that you need. There is no catch to this. And let me explain through this video. What we call the PastureBox 3000. So we've actually made the system more efficient. So the video just described 2,000 pounds of fresh fodder per day. It is now a system that will do 3,000 pounds of fresh fodder per day. So we just did a system design over the last 6 weeks to increase that. We also have another system that does 21,000 pounds of the same per day in a modular system. The idea of modular is so that way it's controlled. The idea is that it's not going to, I'm not going to ask you to build a brand new system. I'm not going to get you to do that kind of new infrastructure on there. It talked about barley, but it does alfalfa, it does wheat. It basically does whatever you need it to do. So you control it versus it controls you. and it enables a producer to actually start to have control, and I use that word very heavily, control over the market as to what they're dealing with. So if you could ask a producer, what is the biggest thing that you're subjected to? I'm subjected to inflation. I'm subjected to pricing costs, the rising cost of fuel. I'm subjected to, and then the list goes on and on. If I were to ask that same producer, if you could control that, would that be a game changer? And that answer is yes, whether you're in the United States, whether you're in the Middle East, in Southeast Asia, or whether you're in Israel, for example. It's pretty simple. It's a 6-day process. It's a sprout. It's a microgreen. It goes from seed to feed in 3 days, and it becomes a nutrient-dense product that is very highly adaptable for animal feeds. The food production that we're talking about in terms of reliability, if I'll give you an example right now, is as we went through COVID, we saw a lot of supply chain challenges that were really interrupted. Someone earlier today talked about having empty shelves in the grocery store. The meat bunker was empty. And we saw that, supply chains were really fragile. So we went from years ago where everything was produced locally. We had gardens and all that kind of stuff. We said, you don't need gardens. We'll just increase more grocery stores. And then we'll have hubs so that way those grocery stores can have the food. And then we saw this kind of circle get a little bit bigger. But as soon as you put a spoke or kind of a crack in that and it became faulty, then you saw challenges that were interrupted all along that food chain. But if you could do this from a producer perspective, is enable that producer to have control and reduce less on that infrastructure that I just described, that's a really powerful statement locally, regionally, and globally. In terms of improved production efficiency, I just talked about seed to growth every day in 6 days. So it's a 6-day cycle, but every day you have the same amount of quantity coming out every day. The value is really high. We heard one woman talking about Benson Hill in terms of increasing the seed quality, so that way the output is also of high quality. This is something that we're seeing from our results and our research that we're having. Land sparing, so it produces 3,000 pounds a day. It also talks about the amount of acres it was going to replace. But I'm not going to say it as a replacement. What if you could now enable a farmer to produce feed quality, feed reliability, but enable them to take that current 50 acres and look for alternatives as to what they can do to help feed the nation. Do they look at regenerative ag practices? Do they look at, we've heard about alternative proteins. Can they increase the herd size with that space? There's so many more options now that enable them to do this with this kind of stuff. The minimal water requirements, we have a solution right here with water requirements, so I want to talk to you after, by the way. But in terms of what it requires, and when we look at 99% less water, and that is whenever I look at comparing how much irrigation, how much crop input does it take to produce this amount of output versus what the solution that we're providing, we actually have results that show that it is 99% less water. That's a real game changer when we just described what you just described, so thank you for including that. So this is an interesting way as to how do we move forward with that. Our roadmap is, I can describe it through, Martha, I'm sure will ask a lot of those questions. We also have what's called the Microgreens Institute. So I can sit here and tell you about this system, what it does or doesn't do. But we have a Microgreens Institute, and what that is designed to do is to get the truth about fodder. The idea for us is to enable every producer to have the data in order to share that data. I don't want to proprietize it. I don't want to trademark it. I don't want to put a patent on it, because then we're getting into a silo solution where you have to beg me to release this data, and we're back to the same problems that we're solving today. The Microgreens Institute has 5 different partnerships right now with universities. We're doing trials on what does it look like to introduce cow-calf operation with fodder? What does it look like? How is it increasing milk efficiency with dairies? So we've partnered with Cornell University, which, as you know, is really big in dairy, Utah State University, University of Wisconsin, California, Davis, Florida, University of Guelph in Canada, where I'm from, and South Dakota State. We've talked with VJ about working with universities here in Missouri. So that's where we're up to right now. But we also work with the Microgreens Institute on farm, with farmers, for farmers. And whenever I say that, it's a farmer would ask me a question is, well, how does this impact my animals? And I can talk anecdotally about that, but why don't we use the Microgreens Institute to develop an inclusion diet that takes your current system and brings it into a future state with this inclusion? Are you still getting the same dietary fiber? Are you still getting the same kind of starch? Are you getting better sugars? Are you getting lower dry matter? Are you getting higher protein? What is it like that? And then how do we take that further and work with that farmer on implementing that on farm? So that's what one branch of our business does, what's called the Microgreens Institute.
Jamie, I'm just going to move us on. Can you wrap it up so we
Yeah.
have time for others?
Yeah, thank you. In terms of markets right now, we are in North America, so that's US, Canada, and Mexico. We are in the Middle East. We have opened an office in Oman, which is the country right beside UAE. Currently, as of today, we are in the UAE at a really instrumental conference. We are title sponsors on that conference, and we are working with producers in Dubai specifically, as well as Abu Dhabi currently. Southeast Asia, as we mentioned, and Australia. So that's us. Thank you. I'll wrap that up, but I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, Jamie.